So you're probably thinking you know what ADHD looks like, right? Hyperactive, impulsive, can't focus, always talking. And that description fits some people, misses most of them. And today we're talking about two types of ADHD entrepreneurs, one male, one female, both running successful businesses, both diagnosed later than they should have been. And their experiences are wildly different. Let's dive into it.
Yo. Yo. Yes. Yo, it's Alyece, say it right, no cap. ADHD CEO, yeah, we run this track. Systems that slap, brains built different. We make sales in our sleep, yeah, the hustle's efficient. This ain't fluff, nah, this is strategy raw for the ADHD. Minds breaking every law. Hit subscribe, don't miss a single show. We're running on dopamine, let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Here's the thing about ADHD stereotypes. Okay, they're based on how ADHD shows up in boys' 1990 classrooms and hyperactive kids disrupting class. When ADHD shows up differently, quietly, internalized, masked as perfectionism or anxiety or being too sensitive, it goes undiagnosed or misdiagnosed as depression or anxiety. And for female entrepreneurs, especially, this means years of struggling with executive function and decision fatigue and inconsistency while thinking you're just broken. Females in general, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, but male entrepreneurs get a different stereotype, right? They're expected to be hyper and intense and entrepreneurial. ADHD gets labeled as ambition, as hustle, and as success, much more for men. And I love on the ADHD CEO, in case this is your first time listening, to really talk about those internal beliefs, because sometimes we don't understand how it shows up in our life until we hear those thoughts that are playing on repeat in our head. And one of the most common ones I see in female entrepreneurs is, I can't possibly be ADHD because I'm not like that guy. I was so quiet about it, right? I was trying to organize my life heavily to manage my brain. I tried to build systems or processes or get organized for everything. Clearly, there was nothing wrong with me. But that is masking in girls. I used to use massive amounts of energy just to look functional, to look like I had it together. Some days I still do. And the reality is my brain was working against me the whole time. And so this is something we address a lot in my free community, Unmasked, specifically because the mask is real and it's exhausting. And male entrepreneurs often mask differently than female entrepreneurs, but it's very common for people with ADHD. Everyone's doing it. Everyone is trying to look normal or look functional. And before I was an entrepreneur, I just had these beliefs like I'm just bad at that. And even in the beginning of my business, I had these beliefs of I'm just bad at business. And so there's this gender component to how people interrupt and interpret your struggles. If you're a guy and you're struggling with follow through, it's often framed as, well, you just need to be more disciplined, right? If you're a woman and you're struggling with the same thing, it's often framed from my experience as you're too emotional. You're dramatic. You're just overthinking. You always get a worst case scenario. And honestly, neither framework is accurate, but they both are symptoms of being someone living with ADHD. And so, my ADHDpreneur Academy really teaches the actual framework about, it's not necessarily about discipline. It's not necessarily about emotion. It's about how your brain processes that dopamine. And we work on this a lot in my academy on building systems that are custom for your business, but how you make decisions and how you manage executive function ultimately determine what result you get in your business. And so once you understand the actual mechanism, the gender-based blame starts to disappear. And I know this showed up a lot in earlier life for me as a child, right? I was dramatic, or I always was a problem, or I always had questions. And I had a comment on there a week ago that was from a mother of a child with ADD, which isn't usually diagnosed these days. It's usually referenced as ADHD for all. But from my experience, something might be different where you live. But from what I know, they don't really diagnose ADD anymore. And she said that, she was backing up my claim in the video, I shared a little bit about a BIP, which is a behavior intervention plan inside an IEP, which is an individual education plan, for children with special needs or learning disabilities. And she said that, they can't just expect these children to control their impulse on their own, that she had a child with severe ADD and, believes they're 2 to 3 years maturity behind their peers. And I know what she was saying, but again, gender bias to a certain extent, because boys it could show up a lot differently than in girls. And so I see this a lot with my daughter now. I didn't necessarily see it in myself as a child, but when I was in high school, I don't remember much before that. Memory is not there, but I was a freshman. All of my friends were seniors. When I got to college, I was 17. I started college at 17. My friends were in their 30s. Okay. I related better to people who were years older than me. So to group everyone in and say neurodivergence are 2 to 3 years behind their peers, maturity-wise, I disagree. And I believe that's why I often got in trouble for asking questions and challenging authority and challenging teachers and my parents. And because I had questions, and to put myself in a position where I felt comfortable enough to ask those questions was hard. And it often got me in a lot of trouble, right? You're questioning adults. You're a child. You're not supposed to do that. And I see that a lot with my daughter now. Of course, hindsight's 2020. But thinking about how this relates to business, it's very easy for me to see where you stop wanting to ask those questions. You stop trying to show up 100% as you because you were punished for it for so long. And so, sure, maybe in boys, maturity levels 2 to 3 years behind. I still don't even like to group everyone together because everyone's completely different and the symptoms and how it shows up in their life is different. But historically, that's not necessarily accurate for girls from the data that we know. This is maybe not an internal belief so much as societal belief. As though if someone is successful, they must not have challenges or think differently, right? I struggle so much with some of this because I'm a people pleaser and I'm worried about offending someone. But if I have a male and a female and they both built successful businesses, there's this narrative of you're fine. See, there's nothing wrong with you. You're thriving. But thriving with undiagnosed ADHD often means you're working 3 times as hard as someone else to get the same result. And absolutely 1000%, there is nothing wrong with you. But you're using extreme systems, extreme discipline, extreme structure, and that's not necessarily sustainable. And that's not success. It is just delaying that burnout. And so I want to walk you through 2 examples today, okay, about diagnosis journey here and how it changes the approach to business. And so we're going to use 2 hypothetical people here today. And I've made these 2 people up based on all of the data I've collected, all of the people I've worked with. Okay. I didn't want to put anyone on complete blast, but let's walk into societal belief number 1, right? ADHD is a boy problem. And so this is the biggest one right here. Medical research for decades looked at ADHD through like a male lens. So females often went undiagnosed. It shows up differently, quieter, more internalized, but it's still there. And for male entrepreneurs, the flip side is that hyperactivity gets celebrated in business culture. That risk-taking, that fast decision-making, that, move fast, break things, that's ADHD often, and that's rewarded. But the downside is the impulsivity that loses money, the hyper-focus that ignores relationships, the emotional dysregulation that blows up deals. Those are less celebrated. And another societal belief I see is there's only one way to succeed as an entrepreneur. And this is where the entire gender stereotype just falls short and ADHD stereotypes collide. Female entrepreneurs are often told to be strategic and methodical and organized, and male entrepreneurs are told to be bold and fast and decisive. And I know there are tons of dads out there that are just killing it, right? They're super involved, and there's even single dads out there. When I met my husband, he was a single dad. So I am not discrediting any of the dads out there that might listen, but often the females also have that maternal struggle of putting the kids first and feel guilt for needing to take time for themselves or their business. And so that's an entirely other level. But female entrepreneurs can be incredibly strategic and also impulse driven. And male entrepreneurs can be thoughtful planners who overthink decisions as well. So ADHD doesn't fit neatly into either box. And it's just this really big lie that you can't focus or you can't get things done if you're neurodivergent. That's just not true. It's different and different in the right context. And so this is where you have to learn to understand yourself. Now try to fix yourself, understand yourself. The more you know about your brain, the more successful you will be. And I really remember the moment I realized my perfectionism wasn't necessarily perfectionism. It was time blindness and anxiety creating like this intense need to control everything. And once I understood that, once I stopped blaming myself for being too much, I actually could address it. And so for me, it was admitting that my success wasn't despite my ADHD, it was because of it. And I also in spite of it. Right? The same hyper focus that built my business also almost burned it down multiple times. That same impulsivity that got me to market things fast and move quickly has also made me miss a lot of things and make a lot of typos. And I'm very sorry about that. But once I knew I was working with and what I was working with, I could actually manage it instead of just white knuckling through it. And so I say all of this because I want you to do your own research. There's only so much I could put in one episode. And again, everyone looks different. But whether you're a male or a female listening to this, you need to do research on how it shows up in your life. Because there was many times in my life where I knew something was wrong. I would go to a doctor and I was put on depression meds, or I was put on anxiety meds, or, I was told to go to therapy because of all the things swirling in my brain. I love therapy. Okay. It is my 1 hour to just ramble, but there was a lot of things that were missed as a child. And so today I want to leave you with 5 key differences and how to work with them. Okay. Because I am a tactical person. I don't like gray area. I don't like concepts. Tell me what to do so I can go do it. All right. So again, female ADHD often comes, diagnosed as perfectionism and anxiety and people pleasing and masking. And I probably should put a disclaimer in this podcast completely that I am not a medical doctor. Please reach out to one if you have concerns about your symptoms or your medication or you're undiagnosed. This is not a medical podcast and I am not a medical provider. But if you're a female entrepreneur and you're struggling with what feels like anxiety or perfectionism or overthinking, you need to address those, right? With someone who understands how it shows up in women. Do your research. I share my experiences so that you know, but your struggle might not be a personality flaw. It might be executive dysfunction disguised as neurosis. So if whether you are diagnosed or you're self-diagnosed, you need to make sure that you're working with people who specialize in adult women with ADHD. Your mentors should be women, okay? If you are working with some specifically on your ADHD or, how to manage it with your business. Men often get celebrated until it doesn't, okay? And so that speed, that intensity, that risk-taking are assets until they're liabilities. And so if you're a male entrepreneur with ADHD, you might not realize, that this is coming or it's happened to you because your traits are valued in business culture. The challenge is knowing when your speed is an advantage and when it's impulsive damage. And so that really requires honest feedback. The Focus and Free membership that I have is built around accountability from people who get, ADHD in business context. But if you're a male listening to this, I challenge you to get feedback from people you trust about when your speed serves your business and when it costs you. And just know that executive function shows up differently. Female often struggle with emotional regulation, time management, but we have solid systems. And male entrepreneurs often have solid ideas, but struggle with that follow through in the details. And I see this with me and my husband, right? He has the ideas that he is the most innovative person I know. His ideas are absolutely incredible. And they have saved his current company hundreds of thousands of dollars. His employer, is just known to be the fixer, right? You give him a problem, he's going to find a way to fix it. But the rollout plan and the details and all of that is not his expertise. Me, I have good ideas, but then I get lost in the details. And sometimes that might hold that idea back from getting out there and getting launched. And so neither is better, but both need support. And again, in the ADHDpreneur Academy, we teach frameworks specifically for this, not generic productivity advice. So you need to identify your actual weak point, not the one you think you should have, but your actual one. because masking has different costs. Females, you often see burnout from overmanaging. Males, you often see burnout from chaotic intensity. Female entrepreneurs often mask by creating extreme systems and structure. And, that's why you have a desk full of unused planners, because you are going to the extreme trying to get it together. And eventually that exhausts you. Male entrepreneurs often mask by moving fast and harder, and that eventually just crashes. And I challenge you, if you're not already in my free community, Unmasked, it exists specifically for this, to acknowledge that the mask is real and that removing it is harder than just being like, oh, be yourself. So sit with this and think about, what are you masking? What would it look like to unmask that? What would happen in your business if you unmask that? And your ADHD brain is your competitive advantage when it's properly understood and managed. Building a successful business because of your ADHD brain, not despite it, that hyperfocus, that big picture thinking, the pattern recognition, the ability to create systems, that's you. So I always love to give action steps and practical implementation tips. Okay. I love to give practical implementation tips. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, download this episode, because you're going to want to come back and listen to this. I'm about to give you some action steps. Okay. So action step number 1, I want you to list 3 things your ADHD brain does exceptionally well. Those are what your business should be built around. Period. The end. If you are not working in your zone of genius, you are going to avoid. That's when you get that time blindness, trying to be perfect. And eventually you're going to get bored, and that dopamine is going to be seeking for something else. And that's what happens. That's where you burn it down. Okay. But a few other things I recommend. I recommend getting in a community or a space of someone who understands your neurodivergent brain and entrepreneurship context. It is 2 different challenges. Being an entrepreneur is a challenge in itself. And then you add neurodivergency on top of that, it is even more challenging. And so when you're hiring a mentor, you're joining a program, or you're, have a support system at home and they don't understand both challenges together, you are often looked at as overthinking or dramatic or emotional. That's where that comes in. The struggle is real. Okay. And the fix is not willpower. So stop blaming yourself for how your brain operates. ADHD entrepreneurs need representation. You need it. You need someone to say, I see you, I know what you're struggling with, and I can help you. Also, implementation tips. Build your business around your brain. All right. You need to understand that male and female ADHD entrepreneurs have different challenges, but equal struggles. And so when you're looking at what is challenging for you every day in your business, what is challenging for you every day in your life, you need to really dig into the specific problem. It's very easy for us as entrepreneurs to say, well, I don't have enough sales, I don't have enough time, or I can't get anything done. No, more specific. Well, I am afraid to sell because I have fear of rejection. So that's why I'm not making sales. You've got to get down to the root cause of the problem if you're going to fix it. That is how our brains work on pattern recognition. And just know that your brain doesn't look like anyone else's. And that's not a flaw, that's information. If you're a female entrepreneur and you've been told you're too anxious, or you're a perfectionist, or you're too much, just know that's how your brain works. And you can work with that, right? We can put in placeholders and double checks and accountability to make sure that you're not becoming a liability. Having someone you can ask and go to and say, hey, am I moving too fast? Someone that'll give you honest feedback. Because either way, your brain works the way it does. The question is whether you're going to work with it or against it and burn out. So you've got to get tired of the mask. You got to get tired of the blame. You got to decide to understand your brain instead of continuing the chaos. All right. So I want you to take some time to sit with this. If you're not already in the Unmasked community, definitely check the show notes. I'll have information in the show notes on my programs, on the free community, some resources for you there too. But gender-specific struggles aren't discussed enough. And we often blame ourselves for all of these things that are just symptoms of your neurodivergency. And when you acknowledge that and you work with it, everything will change. Okay? So if you got any value out of this episode, make sure you take a screenshot of this, throw it in your stories, tag me on IG at socially.awesome. As always, check the show notes for all the resources. And until next time, make it simple, make it social, make it awesome.